I didn't know how I would start, but following G. Spencer Brown, I've started. And the first thing I would like to say has nothing to do with the paper that is by Katja, Pettinen, and myself, which has to do with a number of concepts that I would never want to translate or define in any language: creativity and intelligence. So those I can't discuss if I'm not permitted to discuss anything that can't be reduced to a definition or translatability. So I will really start by quoting a couple of people that say, some of them are anonymous: nothing interesting can be defined or translated, therefore everything is interesting. And then I've collected a couple of dated materials about our ancestors, our recent ancestors. 1872, Darwin, I believe you will find the notion of affordability in Darwin in his expression of emotions. I'm not sure, haven't checked it out. It came to me in movement for a month. No, for actually 6 weeks. Half of them here in Europe. But I have a quote from Julian Huxley, 1912. Living matter always tends to group itself into those closed, independent systems with harmonious parts. Obviously, that was in quotations by him. Though the closure is never complete, the independence never absolute, the harmony never perfect, yet systems and tendency alike have real existence. That sounds so modern. Sounds so modern. And then something in the 50s, I don't have to accept it. Max Delbrück states, a mature physicist becoming acquainted for the first time with the problems of biology is puzzled by the circumstance that there are no absolute phenomena in biology. Everything is time-bound and space-bound. The animal or plant or microorganism, imagine, he anticipated our biology, studied is but a link in an evolutionary chain of changing forms, none of which has any permanent validity. These are all very sobering reflections. But speaking of Delbrück, in the 80s, he had published an article on meaning and matter and non-matter in a historical journal that I don't think is very well known. I don't have it with me. In that, the takeaway was that humans and other creatures, macroscopic creatures, live in that middle zone in a tic-tac-toe 3x3 scheme. That is, we are dealing with the Goldilocks effect of being able to perhaps sense, perceive, and even cognize matters, always relations in context, of course, not things, but we use the word thing anyway. Things that are in a dimension that is in between the super large and the super small, and the extremely deep in time, and that is measurable perhaps only in nanoseconds or minutes. So here we are trying to understand what we think is the whole concept that would embrace the cosmos. And we're just humans. We just have, well, some people think we have teams, but first of all, you have an organism, and it is us. We have this, we don't know what it is, called languaging. Is it a sense? Is it its own thing? Well, we've convinced ourselves in a way that it is sort of our own thing. But we don't understand a thing about it. And that's becoming increasingly clear. Because we've been educated to think that words have meanings and that meanings can be synonyms or antonyms. And they come from somewhere. So in a mechanistic angle, we think it must come from where meaning exists, somewhere deep down. But it's beyond our ken. Consequently, I think in recent decade or two, some people have been separating data, the given, the free, into actual data, actually free stuff that you can count, measure, weigh, from capta, which has to be captured, which has to be interpreted. And there is no unbiased, neutral place from which to do that. Even though we try to sanitize and have all kinds of defenses against bias and so on. Everything is always coming from somewhere, and it is going like nowhere and everywhere. That's just, I think, what we're facing here. Now, to stay on the topic of languaging, let me mention a couple of people or books that I have been influenced by. Per Dirst Andersen, a semiotician linguist in Copenhagen, has been writing over a couple of decades about his empirical research with languaging. By languaging, I mean the spoken word. It is not particularly related to what we have in our heads. It's what we've only had for, well, some would say 300,000 years, but it could actually be a couple of million. Because with Dean Falk's 2025 book, The Botanical Age, she is saying that the earliest possibility for languaging, that is when our internal orientation device, which we retroactively call language, that is in the body, nothing is really in the head, in the body, came out to do more than signal. In other words, signaling is not languaging. Sebeok used to emphasize the criterion of syntax, whatever that includes or excludes. Dean Falk and colleagues, some ornithologists, because they also study two-footed hawking creatures, and with other neurobiologists and so on. She suggested that bipedality was, and that is pre-Homo, that is Australopithecine, most likely, and a couple million years ago, not the couple 100,000 that Homo sapiens can claim. That until our ancestors spent time, albeit initially only during the day, on the ground as two-footed creatures. During that period, we were getting faces. Before that period is well, we were getting stereoscopic vision, our privileged human organ. Observation is like everything. Even though we know we're picking up and in fact braided with our languaging or virtually all the other senses, and we don't know how many senses we have. In English, we have three, and then the joking six. David Howells has written a book on the sixth sense, and it's an edited book, and you have many different strains of scholarship from around the linguistic world contributing what in their culture and their science they consider senses. So that's also a little bit muddy. Um, the reason Dean Falk's book is called The Botanic Ages because she ties fibers into our toolkit. They would be botanic fibers. And from the early pre-hominids, when they were still sleeping in trees, they were fashioning their sleeping baskets out of twigs. And when they came to the ground full time, they were already knowledgeable with the weaving process and made bags, containers and connectors. In fact, containers and connectors, they feed in and out of each other, and that has a certain grammar, even though they're just two things. I'm always suspicious of anything that comes in couplets. As a good semiotician, I'm always looking for a third, and it's always there, but sometimes there's more than one more, but that's okay. Nonetheless, we're accustomed to working in couplets a lot of times, and there's a place to start, but we know there's more than one. We know that everything is in relations and in contexts, and that there's space and time. We also think there's matter, energy, and information, but that would reveal my systems and cybernetic background. Um, and with that background during the pandemic, I tried to get back in touch, and I can tell you they are pretty much where they were 50 years before, but the same as us. And we should have overlapping personnel. I mean, I've been working with them now for 5 years, and I had to ask myself, why am I doing this? Am I not satisfied in semiotics? Uh, well, yeah, satisfied and satisfied, but you always are more than one thing also. Uh, and then I reflected on the fact that those two organizations, international, the ISSS, and the national ASC for systems and cybernetics, are older than our US national organization, but they were started by the same two people, Gregory Bateson and Mark Myrdene. Really, they were the foundational uh, grounds for those two organizations and also for SSA, Semiotic Society of America. But Semiotic Society of America was actually started in 1975 by Thomas Seabuck, but he couldn't have done that with all the work that was done in the decades before. They're at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, by Pettinen and Mead. That's where they held those conferences that are foundational to semiotics as we know it in the contemporary world. So that's my excuse for also dabbling in systems and semiotics. I have these two reservations about how we deal with languaging and language. The written language is a different species entirely. But spoken language could never have been predicted. CDL said there was no such thing as communication. Well, what was communication before languaging was not semiotic, was not language. It was merely signaling and things that did not require active interpretation. It was recognition. And to recognize a sign is not to be engaged in it or having to interpret it with a capital I. So here we are speaking in a single language. I'm assuming that everything is translatable into an infinite number, well, not infinite. Some people like to count, and they will tell us that we have a decreasing number of languages in the world. And maybe down in the 6,000s. It doesn't matter how many you can count, because textbooks before, when I went to school, they would never bought, they'd say a range. It's from 1,500 to 3,500, or it was 2 to 4,000, but 100,000. Okay, thousands, I'm talking about thousands. No one ever ventured close to 5,000 as a guess for how many languages there were, because it really didn't matter. How can you draw a line between a language anyway and another? In any event, our ability to have a larynx and to have the lungs, to have the rhythm of languaging that only could come from being two-footed. So that is one thing that joins all of our languagings together. They're all shaped by the same origin, but none of them were born as there became more languages. None were born with phonemes. And that's something that no linguistic teacher ever even suggested to me. It came as a wild revelation to me only a few decades ago. And hardly anyone recognizes that Per Anderson has another way, another angle to get at any seams or intra-organizations in languaging through his work with many other languages, most of them not minority languages, but spoken in the business world, because he is employed by a business school. He says there are three, that's a nice number, there are three types. He's sometimes used the word grammar, he doesn't mean that. Types of languages. And they are orthogonal to all language families. I first read those words in something I was asked to review for a publisher in 2009. I can remember exactly where I was. Oh, good. That's true. I was in The Hague visiting Dilke Gourlay, whom I didn't get to visit this trip over last weekend. And I was reading this manuscript and read all about Per Anderson's system. He said these three types are context-oriented languages. And one would be Russian. It was his research language in graduate school, fortunately. But there are others, and I don't necessarily remember the few dozen that he's analyzed, but I think Hindi would be one. I think German is one, even though that's related, you know. Okay, and then there's speaker-oriented. Bulgarian would be a Slavic language, I would think, but it is speaker-oriented, not context-oriented as Russian. Chinese, speaker-oriented. Spanish is speaker-oriented, and by the way, Japanese is context-oriented. Then comes hearer-oriented languages, English, and coincidentally, Danish are speaker-oriented languages. Now, my base query here is, well, first of all, he says people in these different types of languages do science differently, but they do their lives differently as well. Their jurisprudence is shaped differently. Their pedagogies are different. Their face-saving techniques are distinctive and make sense within his models. As though that wouldn't be enough, I know from before 2009, a geneticist, biochemist, mathematician, I don't know, and philosophy of science person who's French, who has a lab now in Wuhan, China, as well as in Paris. But way back, it was the end of the 70s or the beginning of the 80s. I had met him. He corresponded with a number of people on the subject of his research, yes, but I can't follow his research. I'm not a microbiologist. But he throws in philosophy of science. And way back then, in the early 80s, I would guess, but he's too busy to tell me. He can't find it in his own records. So I don't feel so bad that I can't find it in mine, the date. He had discovered from his own experience these same three categories of languages in his global research, in his very specialized domain. So I think we should sit up and take notice about our leaving fallow all those other ways of approaching life, our favorite subject matter. And since I've been advertising other people's work, there is something coming out through Brill very soon, and you'll be able to recognize it. I am not supposed to know the name of the author. I reviewed the manuscript maybe 2 years ago anonymously, and did not know that author. I might have deduced the author since then, but I shouldn't be knowing it with it until the book comes out. It will appear to have something about lines, about art, about decoration, and about cognition. And it will inform all of us in new and magical ways. The lines now I can tie back to Dean Falk's botany and her strings. And I have,
So are you about to finish?
yes, I am, that's right, in fact. I was just going to say that the devil echo, or I prefer devil echo, evolutionary stories, because I was talking about ecological stories. Stories come in at least two shapes. One is evolutionary, streams of consciousness, always open, and open to surprise and learning. And then the syntagmatic devil that have thoughts and endings. And it seems to me in science, we are mostly thinking we have to ask questions. That would be a goal-oriented discourse and mind game as opposed to a means-oriented mind game. And with plot, we ask questions. It ends like all development and death. So I don't know why as scientists we think we must always ask questions and pursue them. The questions should prod us into activity. I know in real life that's how it can happen, but we teach our students to develop hypotheses. Thank you.
People said there's the two types, evolutionary
And developmental, and I'm working on the ecological.
as stories coming out, these two shapes, evolutionary. You had, was that the word you used?
Yeah, evolutionary being the accumulation of, in quotes, information, and developmental having a beginning and an end and consequently a middle, and a closure. Yeah. So it's tragic. It's tragic, whereas evolution is a comical, metaphorically. Oh, I also want to talk about metaphor. All language is metaphor. So our metaphors, including Delbruck's metaphors that he was justifying for the study of things that are in the human zone, those are metaphors of metaphors.
Yes,
So I had a real pleasant time talking. It's really nice.
Let me cut closer.
It's real nice to get to soak in, we can just go through a lot, because it's nice and slow and under due time.
Yeah.
So I've had some time to think about these
Good.
concepts here and here or in languages. And actually, there was an example that came to mind. It's a bit of a crass one, so please excuse the disturbance in semiotics. But I was thinking about a conversation that myself and my Ukrainian fiance had about the differences between English and Ukrainian swear words. Now, assuming that Ukrainian as a Slavic language is a context dependent, I think this scheme of categorization of different ways of arranging relationships. Anyway, we came to the conclusion that English language, it likes to focus on certain disgusting ideas and concepts. So I say piss off and fu and this kind of thing. But the most offensive, I don't remember the exact phonetic pronunciation of it in Ukrainian, but one of the most offensive things you can say to someone in Ukrainian is just go, like leave. I repel you from this context.